Boop. Okay. All right. So we're going to read these first two paragraphs. Here we go. The trouble with these boys, said a grim old classical scholar looking up from some milk and watery entrance papers which he had been marking, the trouble with these boys is that the masters have been talking to them about the Parthenon when they should have been talking to them about the optative. We all knew what he meant. We had read work like that ourselves. Let me pause real quick. When he says the optative, what he means is a particular Greek mood that is used to express a wish. So something like, I would love to, or I would like to go to the park. So it's kind of something that's unsure, but you're expressing a desire. So it's a particular mood. Latin does it with the subjunctive, called the optative subjunctive or the cohortative subjunctive. But anyway, so you can think of it this way. The Parthenon and the very fine point of Greek grammar mood. If that helps you. Nitpicky Greek grammar. That'll work. All right. Ever since then, I have tended to use the Parthenon and the optative as the symbols of two types of education. The one begins with hard, dry things like grammar, dates, and prosody, and it has at least the chance of ending in a real appreciation which is equally hard and firm, though not equally dry. The other begins in appreciation, his quote, and ends in gush. When the first fails, it has at the very least taught the boy what knowledge is like. He may decide that he doesn't care for knowledge, but he knows he doesn't care for it, and he knows he hasn't got it. The other kind fails most disastrously when it most succeeds. It teaches a man to feel vaguely cultured while he remains in fact a dunce. It makes him think that he is enjoying poems he can't construe. It qualifies him to review books he does not understand, and to be intellectual without intellect. It plays havoc with the very distinction between truth and error. And yet, education of the Parthenon type is often recommended by those who have and love real learning. They are moved by a kind of false reverence for the muses. What they value, say, in literature, seems to them to be so delicate and spiritual a thing that they cannot bear to see it, as they think, degraded by such coarse, mechanic attention to paradigms, blackboards, marks, and examination papers. They point to the questions examiners set, give the context of any five of the following, and add necessary explanation. But what does that have to do with the real quality of the Tempest? But there is a profound misunderstanding here. This is the so well. These well-meaning educationalists are quite right in thinking that literary appreciation is a delicate thing. What they do not seem to see is that for this very reason, elementary examinations on literary subjects ought to confine themselves to just those dry and factual questions which are so often ridiculed. The questions were never supposed to test appreciation. The idea was to find out whether the boy had read his books. It was the reading, not the being examined, which was expected to do him good. And this, so far from being a defect in such examinations, is just what renders them useful or even tolerable. So Lewis's main point, and it's just so fitting to be here studying Latin with that essay, because Lewis's main point, and I was saying this just before we started the video, is that while we want for all of our children to be able to look at beautiful things like the Parthenon or great art or read beautiful books, that the best way to get to them to do that, to quote Tolkien, the best way is the long way around. It's not by starting and saying, what do you see? What do you think is beautiful? What, and kind of going for that mushy, gushy blah that can come out. But actually, the best way to train them is to train them to think very carefully, rigidly. I'll use his words and the words of opponents. To think rigidly, to think, no, that doesn't work there. So even his line about prosody is a beautiful example. Today, if you went to most schools and said, hey, we're training the kids to write poetry, it would go something like this. Write whatever you feel like you should write. Go pick up a college. I've seen a couple of colleges that do those, you know what I'm talking about, the literary anthologies and their literary poetry. And it's just crap. I mean, it's just rubbish because they haven't been taught They just haven't. I wasn't. They haven't been taught that, the best way to write good poetry is not to be free to do whatever the heck you want, but it's actually to be constrained to a meter. Just like when you play soccer, you don't dribble it all over the stadium, you play on the field of play. And it's the same idea, that if you want to get to beautiful things, even Homer and Virgil didn't play with their meter, they stuck to their meter that they had learned. And so, anyway, beautiful thought from Lewis, and I think beautiful thought for us as we study things that are really nitty-gritty, and that, to be honest, most days as a teacher, and probably most days as a parent, you kind of go, does this really matter? Like, does it really matter that I be able to conjugate these verbs, or to climb these nouns, or scan those meters of poetry, or whatever? And our students will have those same things. But that's where I love what Lewis says is, at the very least, you've taught them something. And maybe even the very least, you've taught them that they don't like learning very much. And it's better than teaching them to think that they maybe have some learning, but they don't. And it goes back to what a friend of mine was saying. He teaches grad school students, and he was saying what he learned when he went to his PhD for the oral examination prior to admission. His then became his advisor, said to him, "Hey, we weren't asking you to know everything. We just wanted to see if you knew what you didn't know. If we could push you to a point where you would finally say, I don't know about that." Or whether you would keep trying to talk and act like you knew stuff you didn't know. And Lewis has that same comment of the point of education is to get children to know, or get us to know, what we don't know. So even when you're feeling like, hey, I don't know how to conjugate that verb, that is exactly what Lewis is talking about. At least you know that you don't know how to conjugate that verb. Or you come away, and our students will. Our students will come away and they will graduate from high school, and it is a blessing to be able to say, I don't really like physics. I'm not going to become a physics major. I don't want to go into that field. I don't really like Latin. I can't stand Latin. And maybe 20 years down the line, which, by the way, let's see if I can find it. Lewis's last sentence of the article is, by the way, kids don't know anything anyway. Why would you believe them anyway? So his final thing is, perhaps, so he says, these critics say to me that we've spoiled them by making it rigid. So he says, if only we wouldn't have spoiled poetry by doing it by these old examinations. They would have been great poets if we hadn't spoiled them with grammar and prosody and, all these rigid things. But his point at the end is but why do we know that that's true? He says, maybe they would have been saints if we hadn't forced them to memorize Scripture. If only we hadn't required these very clearly observable, factual things of them. Maybe they would have been literary luminaries. But his ultimate point is, but why should we believe them? He says, we have only their word for it. And how do they know anyway? So, at the end of the day, whether it's with our children or, again, with people who think, isn't that a really dry form of education? I'm always happy with my form of education because I'm surrounded by, Jefferson and Aquinas and Cicero and Bede and Alcuin. And it's like, and I'm going to take those guys over No Child Left Behind any day of the week. No, wait, it's a new one now. Can anybody tell me what's the new law?
Common Core?
No, there's a new one. It's like, you can, I swear I'm not making this up. It's like, all children succeed something. So it's not, what was it? It was No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, Common Core, and now it's like, all children succeed everything, or something like that. It's ACSE or something like that. Anyway, same old thing, just different name. So I'm gonna take Lewis. I'll just say that. Even if you just gave me Lewis, I'll take Lewis over all the rest of it. So on that note, invigorated to do some Latin here, some conjugating. This chapter is about nothing new as far as ideas go. It's just about new actual nuts and bolts of conjugating. So before we get into the conjugating, let's just review a big idea that comes into it. And the idea is the idea of voice. This is fitting after lessons in carols, by the way. Mm-hmm. Voice. But we mean voice not as in like tenor, soprano, whatever, but voice as in the voice of verbs. So what is a verb's voice?
Passive or active?
Good, passive or active. By the way, just as a extra freebie, Greek has a third voice called a middle. which is more like a reflexive. So I see myself. That Greek has a different form called the middle. Latin just has two, the active and the passive. So before we get into actually playing with these in Latin, let's just do a quick illustration. If we have, I like violent verbs because I'm a male, and I've been reading the Iliad, so, to pierce or thrust or something like that. So an active verb would be one in which the subject, noun or pronoun, performs the action of the verb, possibly on a direct object. It doesn't have to have a direct object, but I'll illustrate both. So Achilles runs. No direct object, but the subject, Achilles, is doing the running. Zeus hurls a lightning bolt. Subject, noun, verb, transitive, direct object. Okay? So anytime the subject noun is performing the action of the verb, is doing the verb, that is an active verb. This is different from like a linking verb where there's no true action at all. For example, I am happy. There's no action. That is neither active nor passive.
What do you call that then?
That's just a linking verb. Yeah. So it doesn't declare an action. It just declares like a state of being.
State of being. So
Yeah.
state of being is not considered an active?
It's not. Yeah. So I exist. Because action, a verb to be active has to be active. It kind of makes sense.
It just feels funny that there shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
It's just
a
nothing.
Voice.
Yeah, it's just nothing. Yeah. So a passive verb, that maybe the best way to think about it is the flow goes the other way. And again, just like our direct object, this last one can be invisible, but I'll do two. In a passive verb, the subject noun receives the action of the verb. So Hector is pierced. Patroclus is slain. Zeus is angered. But we can do the same thing, or add a little bit more detail, just like we did with a direct object. We can do the same thing with what's called an agent. In Latin, the agent is expressed either with the preposition a or ob, or plus the ablative, or just an ablative, and that's called the ablative of agent. So our example would be, Zeus is angered by Hera. Patroclus is slain by Hector. Hector is slain by Achilles. Okay? The body of Hector is regained by Priam. Okay? So, active verb, the subject produces the action, does the action. Passive verb, the subject noun receives the action. So in John 1, there's a great little passive construction. It says, there was a man, homo, sent by God. So the Latin, homo, missus, and what we would have is missus est. They leave that out, and that's for another day. And then we have a deo. There was a man sent by God. Okay? So what we're going to focus on today, we're going to do a little review of the passive and active, because it's been a while, and then we're going to get into a new system of the active and passive. Okay, so this is the big idea to keep in our mind. All right, last time we talked about the present system. So we're going to bring up this chart again because it just never hurts you to see it a lot. The present system of verbs, and then today what's going to be different is we're going to introduce the perfect system of verbs to play with. Got a nice big chart going here. All right. Now, depending on yourself and your own ways of thinking, I have students who love the present system and think the perfect system's a pain. I have students who hate the perfect system, hate the present system and like the perfect system. All I have to say is they both have little bits of difference that can make them easier or harder. Either way, it's about learning the pattern. Okay? So the present system is made up of verbs that build off of the present stem. Build off of the present stem. So I'm going to take a good old stable verb. I'm going to take amo, amare, amawi, amatum. And I'm just going to write those 4 principal parts up on the board. Amo, amara, amawi, amatum. That's a first conjugation verb with a long A in the infinitive before the RE. But you could do it with any verb. It doesn't matter for what we're about to look at. Okay? So the present system is the system, it's the set of tenses that build on these first 2 parts. Amo, amara. Amo, amara. So our present system of verbs, we're going to be kind of getting our building blocks off of amo, amara. Our perfect system of verbs come off of amawi, amatum, the 3rd and 4th principal part. So the present system for any verb of any pattern, even irregular verbs, by the way, sum, esse, fui, futurum, same thing. The first 2 principal parts, building blocks, are going to help us with the present system, to build the present system. The perfect system is going to come off of 3 and 4. Okay? So for the present system of verbs, we have 3 tenses. We have the present tense. That makes sense. We have the imperfect tense. And we have the future tense. To build verbs in the present tense, all we do is we get our stem and we add our active or passive endings. Okay? So we get our present stem by going to the infinitive, the second form, and dropping that RE. So our present stem would be ama. So I'm going to write it. I'm going to write present stem and actually give it to you. So I'll give you both forms. So to build the present, we have the present stem plus our active endings. And our active endings are o or m, st, mus, tis, nt. So I'm going to write that really big because every present system verb is going to do the same thing. Some kind of stem or tense sign plus those endings. So they're either o or m, an s, a t, a mus, tis, and nt. Okay? So to conjugate amo in the present, I've got my amo, and then amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amant. Final MRNT, kilomacron, NT and ND, anywhere kilomacron. To make the imperfect, I'm going to grab my present stem plus ba plus those endings. So that when I read a text, students love the imperfect because they read a text and they see that ba at the end and it's just imperfect. I don't know anything else going on anywhere near there, but I can see that ba. So we have ama plus ba plus our ending. So we go amabum, because that actually takes an M, amabas, amabat, amabamos, amabatis, amabant. Okay. I said I was going to write in the stem, so I'll do that. Ama. So this would be ama, ba, plus these endings. And then the future, what we have, and this is a little weird, but I'll kind of explain it, and then I'll also tell you how most Latin teachers explain it. For the future, we have the present stem. We notice the pattern. The present system builds on the present stem. The present stem plus, and here's the weird thing is, the tense sign of the future is actually only a B, but the vowel shifts around in there, so most teachers have their students actually memorize the endings. So I'm going to tell you that the tense sign is a B, but I'll actually write for you the future endings. And the future active endings are bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt. So you can see that there's a B there, but sometimes it's a bo, and sometimes it's a bit, and then in the third person plural it's a bu. Okay. So all that to say is, kind of simply put, if I see ama plus an ending, or ama plus ba ending, or I'm a bit ending, I know it's got to be a present system verb because it's built on the present stem. Okay? And then to take the entire present system passive, all we have to do is swap out O or M, ST, mustis, nt with our passive endings, which are r, ris, ter, mer, mini, inter. Okay? So for example, in the active, present active indicative, first person singular, we had umo. The present passive indicative, I am loved, we would have amor, O-R. If we did present active indicative, second person singular, you love, amas. To make it passive, amaris, you are loved. Amat, amater. Amamus, amamer. Amatis, amamini. Amunt, amunter. Same thing for the imperfect. Amabum, amabus, amabat. Contrast or compare with amabar, amabaris, amabater. The only thing, and this is why I actually think this is the easiest one, you're just swapping out these active endings, ost, mustis, nt, with passive endings, is, ter, mer, mini, inter. Okay? So when I see verbs with inter instead of nt, I know I've got a passive third person plural rather than an active third person plural. Okay? So even in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade, when our students are chanting these endings, they just think of them as verb endings or personal endings, right? Like third person plural, second person singular. Really what they are active second person singular, active third person plural. And so they'll learn in seventh grade then is when they'll start to see, oh, those were actually active endings, and now we're going to start to play with this whole system of passive endings. And the cool thing is if they've learned their conjugation here, you're just swapping one letter, 2, 3 letters, whatever it is. Okay? So it's actually a really easy process. If they've learned this, then that's an easy step. Okay? So the perfect system, how do you build the perfect system? Again, the perfect system, just like the present system, is made of 3 tenses. The perfect, the pluperfect, and the future perfect. The present builds on the present stem, the first 2 principal parts. The perfect system is going to build on the third and fourth principal parts. Okay? Now, the perfect system involves a little more memory work as far as what it requires of us, which again is probably it's lousy for us as adults to have to do some extra memory work, but it's easy for the kids because they just have to chant some endings, and it's not very hard for them. Okay? So for all of these in the active, we're going to build on what's called the perfect stem. The perfect stem. And the perfect stem is found by going to the third principal part and chopping off the long I, pronounced E, which I know that's confusing. So you go to the third principal part and chop off the long I, the E sound here. And always in our third principal part, we're going to have a long I. And this is what's nice is, even for irregular verbs like sum, esse, fui. Eo, ire, ye. I. Okay, so always, no matter how irregular, how odd the verb is, there will be a long I there. Audio footnote, unless it's an opponent. We'll talk about that when we get to opponents. Okay, so anyway, otherwise, it's always going to have a long I there. So what we do is, to get our perfect stem, we go to the third principal part and drop off that long I. So for all of the perfect system, just like all of the present system, we're going to build it off the perfect stem. So I'm going to write that in nice and large here. I went to my third principal part, amawi, dropped off that long I, and I've got ama. That's kind of weird to say with no. Okay, but so the same thing, the perfect stem, which is ama, and the perfect stem, which is ama. Third principal part, drop the I. And then the main bit of work for us in the perfect system is not going to be with things like, does it have a ba, or does it have a bit, or whatever. It's just going to be the endings that go on the end of it. like when I say things like the endings that go on the end versus endings that go at the beginning. Okay, so for the perfect, to make the perfect active indicative, we have our endings e, isti, it, imus, istis, erunt. E isti it, imus istis erunt. E isti it, imus istis erunt. And the way we can tell, for example, if you looked at imus, you might think, whoa, but what if it were like fugimus? Imus, that's an imus. The way you tell is what's it built off of. So if you have a perfect stem plus imus, it has to be a perfect active indicative, first person plural. We loved, or we fled, or whatever it is. Okay? Same thing here. Amawit versus amut. Or again, fugit, or something like dukit. Duco, ducere, duxi becomes duxit, not dukit. So the stem is what tells us we've got to know, we've got to pay attention to, did it build off of a perfect stem, amal, or did it build off of a present stem, ama? Just one letter difference, but boy does it make a world of difference as far as the translation.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Could you just spell what is the first and second plural endings?
Yes, so it's imus, I-M-U-S,
Thank you.
and istis, I-S-T-I-S, istis.
Thank you.
And then, absolutely, and then erunt is long E, R-U-N-T, erunt. Okay? So the pluperfect, same thing, we're going to build on that same perfect stem. But then what we're going to add at the end, so this is one word. Let me be very clear on that. Here we are talking about one form. So for example, let me just write amawit. You see it here in amawi, but I'm just going to write it again. So we've got amawit. A-M long A, V-I-T, amawit. That's one word, not two words. Okay? That's going to come up over here. Foreshadow. Okay. The pluperfect, same thing, perfect stem plus these endings. These endings, by the way, are identical to the imperfect forms of sum. So that might be something to kind of note in your brain. These are the endings, the imperfect of sum essa. So again, can kind of preserve or conserve a little bit of energy on this. The imperfect forms of sum are erum, E-R-A, erum, eras, erat, one R, eramus, eratis, erant, A-N-T. So all E-R-A, and then you'll notice emst, mostis, nt. Okay? And again, this would be one word. So for example, it would be amaweras. You had loved. You had loved. So one word. Maybe I feel like this is one of those things as a teacher where you say one word so many times that you think everybody had it, and then you'll have the student in class is like, so is this one word or two words? And it just happens, and you go, man, I tried. Okay, not in this class. I'm not worried about that. I'm just saying in general as a teacher, anytime I find I emphasize something, it falls through the cracks. Okay. Future perfect, same thing, perfect stem, amal, plus the future forms of sum. Again, it's nice, it kind of saves us a little bit of work. We're not memorizing kind of random endings. These are actually just perfect stem plus the future form of sum, which is even nice for the name. It's future form of sum, perfect stem. So that might actually help us a little bit. The future forms of sum are ero, eris, erit, eremus, eritis, errant, with an I in this tense. So I'm going to put a little star here. We're going to see that change in a second. But for this, and again, that's one word. So I'll give you that first one. I will have loved. Amawero. Amawero. So one word. So these are our endings. These are our endings. So amawarum, amawaras, amawarat, amawaramus, amawaratis, amawarant. Amawero, amawaris, amawaret, amaweramus, amaweritis, amawerant. moving that accent around. Okay. So this, I know it feels this way. This is all review. It feels like that, doesn't it? Okay. So the perfect passive system is going to change this up. Again, this is why, again, some students like this, some students don't like this. For the present system, all we had to do is swap endings. For the perfect passive system, what we have to do is, you may have noticed it, wait a second, there's a whole fourth principal part over there hanging out that we have not touched yet. Amatum. Well, there it is. Okay? So one quick little nerd note. Amatum is actually called the supine. You don't really need to worry about that at this point. That's a pretty rare, relatively speaking, that's a pretty rare use of it, contrasted with the participial form, which we're going to build right now. Okay? So to build the perfect passive system, every form, here's the nice thing, every form is always going to have two things. It's going to have the perfect passive participle and a form of sum. The perfect passive participle and a form of sum. Okay? So let's look at what that looks like. First, the perfect passive participle, PPP. So it does not matter if I want to say, for example, she had been loved, or she was loved, or she will have been loved, the perfect, the pluperfect, or the future perfect. All of them will have the same kind of element 1 in the equation. Okay? If you like chemistry, they all are going to need this element in what they're doing. I guess you don't have to like chemistry to like that example. Although maybe it would send you into shock if you didn't like chemistry. Okay, anyway, so the perfect passive participle, very easy to build. You go to the fourth principal part, and you change the ending to match the subject noun. So the fourth principal part, so the fourth PP, and then change the ending to the first or second declension as needed to match our subject noun or subject pronoun. Okay? So for example, do a couple examples. Caesar had been loved. Kaiser amatus. Us, because Caesar is a masculine nominative singular. He's our subject noun. So these are all, by the way, these are always going to be not masculine. They're always going to be nominative, because they're always going to match your subject noun. Always, always, always. But it might be a feminine subject noun. Scintilla amata was beloved, or something like this. Okay? The Romans, Romani amati. The Romans had been beloved. Okay? Because a participle is a verbal adjective. And
Can you go back? I'm confused
Yeah.
about the ending. So the fourth principal part, and then which endings?
And then
Can
we're
you point to them?
we're putting on the first or second declension endings as needed,
Which is
which would be our us or
Oh.
I, or because these are just
Oh.
nominatives. So either us e. So for example,
oh.
Kaiser amatus, beloved Caesar
Putting
had
on
been
noun
loved.
endings
Noun and adjective endings, right? And adjectives.
onto a verb.
That's right, and this is the cool thing. So we see this in Latin. We can't really see this in English, but this is worth a timeout for us to think about. Participles are verbal adjectives. So watch, ready? The frying chicken smelled delicious. What word describes the chicken?
Frying.
Frying. It's built off of the verb I fry, or to fry. In English, though, we can't really see that it's an adjective except that it's standing right next to the chicken, right? The frying chicken. In Latin, we build it off the verb, but then we change its ending to match the subject noun.
Can I ask a stupid
Yeah.
question? I may have been like focused on something else, but does this have anything to do with passive perfect?
Mm-hmm.
But so the passive perfect is the
We use the participle. So this is as close as Latin gets to like a helping verb like English. For example, in English, I'm going to keep it simple and I'm going to keep it active just for this example. But in English, we might say something like this. He was loving.
But, yeah.
Blah, 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 whatever. Okay? In Latin, that would just be a verb, right? Amabat. Oops, pardon me. Amabat. Latin almost never uses helping verbs. It uses tense signs and conjugations. English loves helping verbs. Needs them. If we wanted to make it passive, he was being loved. That's really clunky. Latin would do that by taking amabat and making it passive. Amabater. He was being loved. All we had to do in Latin was change it to make it a passive ending in the imperfect. Okay? But that was in the present system. In the passive system, now what we're seeing is this. What we're on our way to seeing. If I wanted to say, I loved, it's amawi. I loved. But if we want to say, I was loved, what we're going to do, and I'm going to throw it out there just so you can see what we're building towards. If I wanted to change it now to passive, since I'm a male, I'm going to have amatus. But if it were you, you'd say amata. And if it were all of us, we would say amati, because we're male and female, so we go to the masculine and that. So, amatus sum. Two different words. I was beloved, or I was loved. And so in the passive system, kind of part one of making it perfect passive is the perfect passive participle. Okay? Amatus. I'm going to erase amawi now. But again, if it were, let's say a group of ladies, if it were the women were loved, what would be the form of our participle? The women loved. Amatai, yeah, amatai. Or the soldiers, amati. So part one of how to make it passive for the perfect passive system is the perfect passive participle. The second part is then some form of sum essa. Okay?
And what does the sum get?
It's what shows us we have it. You need both of these.
Then what's the subject? Like, is it?
So it would be, now here I can see it because of sum.
Yeah.
I
like,
was.
Right. But
that's
like,
right.
Could you have it with a
You
number?
could, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So then we could also have a sentence like, say, Kaiser amatus est.
But the amatu
Caesar
is match,
was loved.
because that's sort of like an adjective. It's
That's-
going to match.
It's a verbal adjective, so it has to match its subject now. That's exactly right. So this is the, and you feel it, this is the new stuff right here. Okay? So for any perfect passive verb, perfect passive, pluperfect passive, or future perfect passive, they are all going to have a perfect passive participle. And we're going to see quite a few
And
examples
then you
of this.
just do the sum and
And then, so if I wanted to be perfect passive, so I'm actually going to kind of draw little lines so we can see what we're doing. I know the lines are really helping at this point, but it is very clearly laid out also in the book. Okay. So if I want it perfect, then I'm going to need, as a helper, I'm going to need the present of sum. Yep. So sum est, sumus estis sunt.
But
So, for example-
So is this, okay, wait.
So for example,
But
if I
then
said, hold on one second.
because it doesn't, it's not one of those two, so you can put it in, okay, never mind, I got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay. So for example, if we wanted to say, we were prepared.
Yeah.
Parati, if there's a male in the group, parati sumus.
Yeah.
Those are two words. So earlier, this is the big difference. Earlier, all of these have been one word. Only now in the perfect passive system do we actually have two words. A perfect passive participle with the present of sum, we were prepared, we were loved. A perfect passive participle with an imperfect of sum, eram, and now look, eram, eras, erat, eramos, eratis, erant. Okay? So we had been prepared. We had been readied, by our general. Parati eramos. My perfect passive participle did not change. Readied, prepared. It didn't change at all. The only thing that changed was the tense of sum. Last but not least, for the future perfect passive participle plus the future of sum. Ero, eris, erit, ermus, eritis, erunt with a U. Quick comment on the spelling change. You can see, actually, why the spelling change would have to happen. Because if you had amawerunt, they loved, and it looked the same, amawerunt. It would look the same because in the ancient text they wouldn't have the macrons. We have them to kind of help us a little bit with scansion and things like that, but especially for poetry. But they would not. So we have a spelling change here, amawerunt. Versus now we would have parati eramus. We will have been prepared. So this, in looking at this, I think this is one of the cool moments of Latin. This is the entire indicative system. This is it. This represents 60 to 70% of all the verb work you'll ever have in Latin. Is this right here. And that's pretty cool. So when you're reading the Bible, for example, or reading Cicero or whatever, the odds are that most of the verbs will be represented right here on the board. Still, there's another 30% or whatever, 40% out there, but this represents most of them. Okay? So this chapter in the work, the thing to especially be careful of, and they make a little note if you read through the grammar. The thing to be careful about is that when you're seeing, for example, the present of sum, you'll be tempted, most students are tempted to say something like this: I am ready, or we are ready, forgive me. But together, so if they were separate,
they're going
so to
to be
speak,
right next to
that's
each other.
right, but they'll be right together. And when you see the perfect passive participle plus the present of sum, it's we were readied, or we were ready, prepared, or something like that. So just be careful about that. You're so used to seeing sum, I am, but if you have paratus sum, I was prepared. So again, this is where maybe that chemistry comes in, that when the two elements are added, they're actually something different than what they were originally. I think that's right. Is that right, science people? When the two elements come together, they're different something.
Yeah.
Compound? Yeah.
There you go. I just want to make sure. All right. The second thing that the chapter deals with is pretty basic. It's the use of the interrogative pronoun quis, quae, quod. Quis, quad. So if you look, you can see that declension on page 124 in the 6th edition. I just grabbed a copy of the 7th edition just so maybe, if anybody has that, I can kind of cross-reference those pages. But they give you the declensions there of quis and quad. Those are the interrogative pronouns. So what
As
or
opposed to like the
who.
beginning of the little clause.
That's right. So do you remember what those are called? Relative pronouns. So actually, if you look on page 124, it
They're
is
almost the
helpful.
same, but not quite.
That's right. So it is helpful to kind of look at those. If you look at the chart, probably the big helper is the nominatives are different. Nominative singular. So for your relative pronoun, my father who loves me, such and such. The relative pronouns, their nominative singulars are qui, quae, quad. The interrogative pronouns, who is that woman, are quis for the masculine and feminine, and quid for the neuter. Otherwise, notice in looking at them, they are identical. Except Quid, which as a neuter has the same accusative form. So it would be quad in the accusative, here it's quid in the accusative. Okay? So usually, the good news is, usually for us, almost always for us when we're reading a text, we have question marks. So that helps us a ton. If we have a relative, it's going to always have its antecedent right in front of it. There was a man to whom the name was John, versus, who is that man? Who are you? Something like that. So almost always the relative will have its antecedent right in front of it. The interrogative, the best way to tell is that it's going to have a question mark at the end in our translations. Okay. Though I can guarantee that there will probably be times when you're going through and trying to translate something and you're barking up the wrong tree one way or another. Wait, I can't make this work. And then you'll realize, oh, it's an interrogative. That's the problem. Which happens all the time. But at the end, you'll have to see it like a dozen times. And then after you've made the mistake a dozen times, you'll realize, oh, that's right. It's an interrogative. Okay. They also give you a little note on the interrogative adjective, which is same in form, but it'll always go with a noun. Which book? In what book? Or something like this. From what woman? Things like that. So an interrogative adjective, just like you would expect an adjective to do, it's always going to be put right next to the noun. In which book did you read that? Quo libro legisti? In which book did you read it? Okay. So that's the nice thing about the interrogative adjectives. And almost, for whatever it's worth, almost never do I have the same problem with the adjective that I'll have here. And almost always, once you realize it's a question, the battle's halfway done. Because you realize, okay, if I have quem librum, which book, there I can see, oh, it's an adjective right next to the noun. Instead of, for example, quem amas, whom do you love, or something like that. So that's the big difference there, but they note that. So there'll be a lot of that in this chapter, but otherwise, the main thing really to focus, it's great, definitely focus on these pronouns, interrogative or relative, but otherwise, really, I would say for the next handful of weeks, because I'd like to try to meet early January, but for the next handful of weeks, really focus on those conjugations, seeing, training your eyes to see. I've got, for example, on number 2 in practice and review, starting to train your eyes to see, deleta est. Ooh, and you'll start to feel it. It's kind of neat as you'll start to sense it happening is you'll start to sense, oh, wait a second, I've got deleta. There's just something in our brains that tricks and we go, that looks like it's coming off of some kind of verb. Deleta est. And you'll see that sum with it. And you'll go, oh, okay, this has got to be a perfect passive. Something was destroyed. Should be about Carthage, but it's not. So anyway. All right, well that is it for tonight. Any questions over that? I know there's a huge chart that I erased because I didn't want any questions about it. No, not really.
Can I ask
But,
a question about, I have series, you may want to turn it
that's right.
But okay, so you know how they go present, active, indicative?
Yes.
What do you say when it's a sum esse?
Yeah, okay. So for example, if I saw, we'll take that simple sentence, Kaiser, paratus, erat. So in my eyes, I could ask the students, tell me about paratus, pars paratus. And they should be able to tell me that's a perfect passive participle, masculine nominative singular. But if I said to them, please parse the verb, this is the complete verb. So they would parse this as a pluperfect passive indicative third person singular, coming from paro parare, meaning I prepare.
How do you just do sum esse in general without?
Oh, so if I just had to do, Caesar was.
Yeah.
That's your question. Okay, so erat doesn't have a voice. It's not active or passive, so you just leave it blank. So I'd say imperfect indicative, third person singular, from sum esse, meaning I am.
So is it it's got no voice because it's this maybe, I think in charts, so I want it to make sense,
Mm-hmm.
but the sum forms look like they're the present system forms because, you're going up to the perfect of sum, the imperfect of sum, and the future of sum.
Yes.
Do you see what
So-
I'm saying?
So,
I
and
don't
here's,
understand.
that's a good point. So this is maybe a little counterintuitive. We are using, for example, the present, the imperfect, and the future
But that's for the
of sum
perfect system.
to build the perfect system.
So
But
that's-
here's what will help you. The forms of sum, the principal parts of sum
Yeah.
are sum,
S.
esse, fui.
Yeah.
So you can very clearly see, and this is kind of the wild thing. So to say I had been, you would go to the third principal part, chop the I, fu, and add the imperfect of sum, eram. So there, sum is like cannibalizing itself or something. It's going, I had been.
So there's only
Perfect
three
stem
principal
plus-
parts to that?
There's a third, fourth one, futurum.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, it's okay. I just was throwing.
Okay, so then that would be the perfect system for,
So yeah, so the perfect system would all build off of fui. So fui, so those I isti it, imus istis erunt. Fui, fuisti fuit, fuimus, fuistis
but this
fuerunt.
is the perfect system using the first two principal parts to build the perfect system passive. Is that right? I'm just
That
trying
is
to make sure I
correct.
have it in my head right.
That is
because-
correct.
okay.
So to build the perfect system passive, so for example, I'm going to go through all three forms of sum. Caesar was readied, or was prepared.
Mhm.
Caesar had been prepared. Caesar will have been prepared. So you're right when you're saying we're using the present system.
But you're
present,
using
imperfect,
the
and
words
future.
have, will have been, have been of the perfect system, but using the
That's right.
forms from the
That's
present
right.
system.
That's right. So that's where, again,
That's where I was like,
yeah.
something seems funny. 'cause
so
it's
that's
not-
where it might be helpful to think of it as a compound,
Yeah.
because they're coming together and they're making something different. You know, once they've been added, this is really a different thing. This is not Caesar is ready.
Right,
This
right.
is Caesar was ready or was
Uh-huh.
prepared.
Oh, that's confusing.
It is.
Oh.
So that's where the nice thing is at least I find with the students, almost always the actual building of this is pretty easy for
Yeah.
them, but it's the translating that's
I
harder.
can see
That's
how
right.
that's like,
That's
it's
right.
messing with my brain, because it feels like it's like,
Yes. So this is where, for it's usually in 7th grade, but that chart that I put up on the board, that's the kind of thing that they have on tests back to back to back to back
just
to
'cause I
back.
have to.
That's
get it.
right, because you just, it's just that nitty, I mean, it's so fitting to end with the C.S. Lewis, the Parthenon, the optative, because that's it. It's just, it's unglamorous and just no fun, and I don't think it's fun either, but if you're gonna do the careful reading, you know, being able to see that verb stuff, you kind of have to do it. So, yeah. But it's not fun, and that's why I learned as a teacher, I had to keep putting the same thing on the test, because, you know, maybe one week they got, you know, 5 of them right and missed the 6th one, or whatever it was, but the only option was to keep hammering them with it. Because even to take one verb, you have, think about it, you have 12 conjugations. Present active, passive, future active, passive, imperfect active and passive, perfect active and passive, pluperfect active and passive, future perfect active and passive indicative, all of them. So it takes a while, but you want to be able to do it so that when you read Caesar, you can go, oh, what's this? He's doing this. So that is the payoff, but yeah, it is totally a Parthenon and the optative kind of setup. So, any other questions? No? All right, awesome. Well, for this week, I will, or for this month, or whatever, this chapter, I will try to get out these translations, not too quickly,
Nope.
but I'll try to get them out at a
Don't do
good
it.
good time. I'm loving the longer translations. I don't know, maybe it's, maybe y'all aren't, but I love some of his longer translations. They're a lot more fun. I enjoy those. And actually, I'm translating Cicero's. Am I reading De Amicitia or De Senectute? I can't remember. He hasn't gotten to his argument. Yeah, so I'm reading one of these works by Cicero, but I should probably know what it is. I'm clearly not a very good reader yet. Anyway, all right. Well, later.
Thank you.
You're
Have a
welcome.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Kind of the thinking carefully